The notice arrived on a Tuesday, and Beatrice Wyndham read it 3 times before she understood what it meant. It was not addressed to her. It was addressed to her father, Henry Wyndham, late coroner of Aldwick Parish, who had been dead for 4 months, and whose desk she had been clearing in stages ever since, because the whole task at once was more than she could manage. The letter came from the office of Mr. Calloway. She almost missed it buried under a stack of unpaid physician invoices, and it bore the seal of the Merston estate. She knew the seal. She had spent 6 years assisting her father in his work, transcribing inquest notes, cataloguing cause of death findings, and organising the coroner's records with the same systematic patience she had inherited from a man who believed that everything, including grief, could be managed with the proper filing system. She had seen the Merston seal before. Once, on a case her father had ruled an accident, and then never spoken of again. The letter was brief. It informed Mr. Henry Wyndham, in the careful language of solicitors who say very little while implying a great deal, that his continued cooperation in the matter of the late Mr. Oliver Vane was appreciated, and that the annual arrangement would be renewed upon receipt of his formal acknowledgement, and that Lord Merston trusted this understanding would remain, as it had always been, a private one. Beatrice set the letter down on her father's desk and looked at it for a long time. Oliver Vane had died 2 years ago. He had been found at the foot of the east staircase of Merston Hall at 6 in the morning, his neck broken, ruled a tragic fall by Henry Wyndham, coroner of Aldwick Parish, in the first week of November. Oliver Vane had been 24 years old. He had been the younger brother of Lord Merston, the current Earl. Beatrice had transcribed that inquest report herself. She had been troubled by it at the time. The bruising on Vane's left wrist had been inconsistent with a fall. The angle of the neck fracture was wrong for the height of the staircase. There had been no defensive injuries, which a man startled awake and falling would almost certainly have sustained reaching for the banister. She had noted all of this in her transcription notes and had left them on her father's desk, and the next morning they were gone, and the final report read only, "Death by misadventure, accidental fall on interior staircase, no further inquiry recommended." She had been 23. She had not yet understood that some reports were written to close doors rather than open them. Now she was 25. Her father was 4 months in the churchyard, and a solicitor's letter in her hand told her that Henry Wyndham had been receiving payment from the Merston estate for 2 years in exchange for his silence. The amount was not specified. It did not need to be. Her father's sudden capacity to pay off the physician's debts that had been mounting since her mother's illness made perfect sense now, in a way it had not at the time. She pressed her hands flat on the desk and made herself breathe. The feeling was not grief exactly. She had loved her father, and she was not yet finished grieving him. This was something else, something colder and more precise. The sensation of a floor dropping away to reveal a room you had not known was beneath your feet, and the room containing things you could not unsee. She folded the letter carefully and put it in the inside pocket of her coat. Then she went to the filing cabinet, in the corner, the locked one, the one whose key her father had kept on a chain at his waist, and whose key she had found only last week in the lining of his winter coat. She used it now. The Vane inquest file was in the back. Her father had kept her draft notes, after all. Beatrice Wyndham had grown up in the coroner's house at the edge of Aldwick village, and she had learned to read death the way other girls learned to read music. Cause of injury, angle of force, time elapsed. She could estimate a death window from lividity and temperature with the same ease that she could recite the parishes within a 3-county coroner's jurisdiction. Her father had taught her, at first because she was curious, and he could not afford to be impatient with her questions, and later because he genuinely could not manage without her. By 17, she was drafting his reports. By 20, she was correcting them. None of this had any market value, as her father had occasionally reminded her. A woman who could read an inquest report was not a woman anyone was looking to hire. She was furniture that could write, he said once, not unkindly, simply describing what the world had told him. She had not forgotten it. She had not argued. She had gone back to her filing cabinet and organised it better than before. The morning after she found the letter, Beatrice took the locked file to the kitchen table and spread its contents under the window light. her draft notes, a sketch she had made of the bruising pattern. 2 statements from household staff that had been excluded from the final report, both attesting that Oliver Vane had been heard arguing in the upstairs corridor on the night before his death, with a voice one of them identified as belonging to his brother. Her father had excluded those statements. The name of the voice was not written down anywhere. It was described only as a male voice, identified by the witness as familiar. But one of the witnesses, a kitchen maid named Dorgan, whose address was noted in the file, had added a single handwritten line at the bottom of her statement. "I have worked at Merston Hall for 11 years. I know his lordship's voice." Lord Merston, Rhys Vane, the current Earl of Merston, who had not been seen in public since his brother's death, who conducted all his estate business through a solicitor, who reportedly refused to receive visitors, and about whom the village had developed a quiet, collective understanding that something had broken in him the night Oliver died, and that the house on the hill had gone dark in a way that had nothing to do with candles. Beatrice made herself tea and thought carefully. She had the draft notes, she had the excluded statements, she had the solicitor's letter. What she did not have was any way to bring these things to light without placing herself in the position of accusing an earl of both murder and corruption, on evidence that her late father had deliberately suppressed, using a file she had accessed with a key she had found in a dead man's coat lining. She also did not have a position, a living, or a clear plan for the next 6 months, now that the coroner's house would pass to the parish, and she would need to find somewhere else to be. She was still sitting at the kitchen table when the knock came at the door. The man on the step was a solicitor, which she recognised from the leather case and the particular expression of men who deliver news they have been paid not to feel. His name was Mr. Fen Alderton. He was, he said, acting on behalf of the estate of Merston. He had an offer for her. The estate of Merston, Mr. Alderton explained, required the services of a records clerk. The current Lord Merston was undertaking a full audit of the estate's legal documentation, deeds, lease agreements, correspondence, bound records going back 3 generations, and required someone with the capacity to catalogue, cross-reference, and organise an archive that had grown disordered in recent years. The wage was generous, the position was residential. Lord Merston had been made aware, through his inquiries, that Miss Wyndham had experience in document management and legal record-keeping, and that she would shortly be requiring a situation. He did not say, "We know your father took our money." He did not need to. Beatrice looked at Mr. Alderton for a moment. She thought of the solicitor's letter in her coat pocket. She thought of Dorgan's handwritten line at the bottom of a witness statement. She thought of the bruising on Oliver Vane's wrist and the neck fracture at the wrong angle. Then she said yes. The carriage that came for her on Friday morning was plain and well kept, with no crest on the door. The drive to Merston Hall took 2 hours north through country that grew stonier and quieter the further they went, the farmland giving way to open moorland, the hedges thinning to low stone walls and then to nothing at all, and the sky above it all the particular grey of northern England in November, low and close and uninflected. Merston Hall itself sat at the end of a long drive bordered by bare oak trees. It was a large house, older than its windows, built from the local stone in shades of brown and slate, 3 stories, the east wing visibly newer than the west. The grounds were maintained with a mechanical precision that suggested money and indifference in equal measure. Nothing was neglected. Nothing was welcoming. The gardens were trimmed to within an inch of their lives, and the front steps were swept clean, and there was not a soul visible anywhere. A woman met her at the door, Mrs. Trove, the housekeeper, with a sharp face and a measured smile. She showed Beatrice to a room on the 2nd floor of the east wing, comfortable, clean, recently aired, with a writing desk and a good lamp and a window that looked out over the east garden. Then she said, Lord Merston would receive her at 4. Beatrice spent the intervening hours unpacking her trunk, organising the small stack of reference documents she had brought, and looking out the window at the east garden, where nothing moved. At 4 she was shown to the study on the ground floor of the west wing. The room was large and dark-panelled, lit by a fire and 2 lamps. One wall was entirely bookshelves. There was a wide desk near the window, and behind the desk stood the current Earl of Merston. He was taller than she had expected. dark-haired, broad-shouldered, with the lean look of a man who forgot to eat when he was working. He had his back to the door when she entered, standing at the window with his hands clasped behind him, looking out at the same grey sky she had been watching all afternoon. And he did not turn immediately when Miss Trove announced her. When he did turn, Beatrice saw his face for the first time, and she understood in a single involuntary moment why the village had described him the way it had. There was nothing theatrical in his grief. It was not visible the way grief is visible on people who are performing it. It was simply structural, built into the line around his jaw and the flatness at the back of his eyes. The way a frost heave is structural in a road, invisible until you knew what you were looking at. He looked at her with the direct, unornamented attention of a man who had no patience left for anything performative. Rhys Vane, the Earl of Merston. She had known his name from case files and solicitors' letters and a single handwritten line in a witness statement. He was 31 years old, and he looked like someone had taken 31 years and compressed them into a much shorter space. "Miss Wyndham," he said, "thank you for coming." His voice was even and unhurried. She thought, "He has been practicing that sentence, I understand," he said, "that you are familiar with the management of legal documentation. The estate archive is in considerable disorder. Mr. Alderton will brief you on the scope of the project. I would like you to begin in the morning." He spoke as though the conversation was already finished. Beatrice said, "I can do that." She paused. She had not planned to say anything else. And then she said, "I should like to understand what I may and may not access." He looked at her steadily. "Everything in the East Archive room. The West Library is personal correspondence and family records. I would ask you not to disturb those." She nodded. She kept her face arranged in the expression she had used for 6 years in rooms where the truth was slightly different from what was being said. He dismissed her with a nod and turned back to the window. Beatrice walked back through the corridor toward the East Wing and thought, the West Library. Personal correspondence and family records. She thought about Oliver Vane's death recorded in his older brother's handwriting. She thought about what it might mean that the one thing Rhys Vane had said not to touch was family records. She thought, he is hiding something, and then she thought, or he is protecting something. The two were not always the same. The archive room was exactly as chaotic as promised. 3 generations of estate documents in varying states of organization, some bound, some loose, some filed into boxes that had been labeled in different hands across different decades. Beatrice spent the first 3 days cataloguing what was there, building the index from the outside in, learning the shape of the disorder before she tried to impose order on it. She worked methodically, the way her father had taught her, before she understood her father well enough to distrust some of his lessons. She noted discrepancies. She flagged inconsistencies. She kept a separate ledger for things that needed cross-referencing. On the 4th evening, she was still in the archive room at 8 o'clock when the door opened and Lord Merston came in. She had not heard him on the stair. He moved quietly for a man of his size, which she noted and filed away without comment. He looked at the table she had commandeered, covered in sorted documents and 3 different colour-coded ledgers, and his expression shifted slightly. Not surprise. Something more like recognition. "You've been at this for 4 hours," he said. "I found an inconsistency in the 1887 boundary survey," she said. "I was tracing it back through the earlier deeds. The northern boundary of the Fenwick pasture is recorded as 280 yards in the original grant, but 310 in the 1887 revision. Someone added 30 yards to a neighbour's land, and I don't think it was a measurement error." He was quiet for a moment. "My father," he said finally. "He made an arrangement with the Fenwick family in 1887. There should be a supplementary deed in the correspondence files. I haven't reached those yet." He crossed to the shelf along the north wall, found a bound folder, and set it on the table beside her. His hands moved with the ease of someone who knew this room before it became disordered, and she watched him without appearing to watch him. "Thank you," she said. He didn't leave. He stood beside the table looking at her ledgers with an expression she couldn't fully read. "You use colour," he said. "I was cataloguing my father's records from the age of 13, she said. "Red for discrepancy, blue for cross-reference, black for confirmed. It's faster than writing margin notes." He looked at the red-marked entries in the ledger. "Your father," he said. "The coroner." "Yes." The silence shifted. Beatrice kept her face still. She could feel the weight of what was not being said pressing against the walls of the room. She had kept her father's letter in the locked box at the bottom of her trunk. She had not decided yet when or whether to produce it. "I'm sorry for his death," Lord Merston said at last. His voice had changed register, something deliberate in it, like a man placing a word carefully on unsteady ground. The loss of a parent is a particular kind of disruption. Beatrice looked up at him. She thought, he is not wrong, she thought. He knows what my father did for him, and he is not certain whether I know it too, and he cannot ask. She said, "Yes, it is." He nodded once and left. Beatrice sat alone in the archive room for a long time after that, listening to the fire and the silence of a house that had learned to be very quiet, and she thought about the man who had just stood beside her table, with the ease of someone returning to a familiar room, and the flatness behind his eyes that was not coldness, but the specific exhaustion of someone who has been carrying grief in a space where no one was allowed to mention it. She thought, "I came here to find evidence of what he did." She thought, "What if he didn't do it?" The weeks that followed were strange. The house ran on precise, silent rhythms. Meals appeared at consistent times. Mrs. Trove managed the staff with the quiet authority of a woman who had been doing it long enough that the work had become invisible. Lord Merston kept to the West Wing most mornings and appeared in the archive room some evenings, and these visits gradually lengthened from a few minutes to an hour. And the hour became 2. He did not read to her or have her read to him. What he did was look over her shoulder at documents that confused him and ask questions, and listen to the answers with careful, unguarded attention. He asked about lease law. He asked about the difference between a fee simple and an entailed estate. She answered him from 6 years of coroner's adjacent legal work, from the depositions and land disputes that had crossed her father's desk, and she watched him absorb the information the way she might watch someone drink water after a long dry stretch. He was intelligent in a specific, applied way that had been badly served by grief. For 2 years the estate had been running largely through Mr. Alderton's management, and Merston had been present without being engaged, and the archive room was the physical record of that. Things had been filed incorrectly because no one who knew the system was paying attention. Things had been missed. Beatrice found a forged lease agreement in the second week. A tenant on the south edge of the estate had been paying rent on a parcel of land that, according to the original grant, did not belong to the Merston estate at all. The lease bore Lord Merston's signature. She looked at the signature for a long time. Then she held it beside 3 other documents that bore his signature, confirmed estate documents with notarized dates. She looked at the angle of the pen stroke on the capital M, the crossing of the R, the tail of the terminal, N. She went to find him. He was in the West Library, which she had not entered before. She knocked. He opened the door himself, which she had not expected. She held out the 2 documents. "This lease is forged," she said. "That is not your signature." He took both papers and looked at them for a long moment, standing in the doorway of the room she had been told not to enter. She could see, past his shoulder, that the West Library was less ordered than the archive. Books pulled from shelves and left face down. A chair positioned close to a small writing desk. On the desk, a single framed photograph, face down. She recognized the impulse. She did not comment on it. Lord Merston looked up from the documents. His jaw had tightened. "How certain are you?" "Quite certain. I've been reading your signature for 2 weeks across 40 years of documentation. This crossing is done right to left. Yours goes left to right with a slight upward pull at the end. The proportion of the capital letters is also wrong." He was quiet for a moment. She continued. "The parcel in question borders the Strathlaw property to the south. I believe someone is using a forged lease to draw rent from a tenant who doesn't realise the land isn't owed to Merston. Who handles the southern rents? That would be a question for Mr. Alderton." A stillness came over his face that she had not seen before. Not grief this time. Something cooler and more focused, he said. "Miss Wyndham, did Mr. Alderton arrange your hire?" "Yes." He looked at the forged lease in his hand. He looked at her. He said, after a pause that had some weight to it, "I asked him to find me someone with experience in legal records. I didn't expect—" He stopped. Then he said, "I didn't expect someone who would find that in the second week," Beatrice said. I nearly found it in the first. The filing is quite poor." Something moved across his face that was the near relative of a smile. It came and went quickly, like light through a fast cloud. He said, "Would you come into the library? There are some things I would like you to see." The West Library, it turned out, was where Rhys Vane kept the things he had not been able to make himself address. Not disorder for disorder's sake. Something closer to the aftermath of a storm. Objects left where they had come to rest when the energy to put them right had run out. A coat draped over a chair that she recognized, from the style of cut, as belonging to someone younger. A pair of boots near the fire, small enough for a man of lighter build. The face-down photograph on the writing desk. Lord Merston did not look at any of these things. He moved past them with the practiced inattention of someone who has arranged for certain objects to exist, in peripheral vision and nowhere else. He opened a drawer in the writing desk and removed a file. She recognized the shape of it before he handed it to her. She had seen enough files in enough shapes to know, by the thickness and the age of the paper and the way it had been handled, that this one had been read many times. "These are the statements taken on the morning my brother died," he said. The original statements, before they were transcribed for the inquest. She understood what he was telling her. She kept her face very still. She opened the file. The statements were in rough hands, household staff giving their accounts in the early morning light, some of the writing unsteady, as though the scribes themselves had been shaken. 3 statements described hearing an argument on the upper corridor the previous night. 2 of those 3 named the second voice. One name appeared in both. Mr. Alderton, Fen Alderton, who had been present at Merston Hall on the night before Oliver Vane died, in connection with a set of estate documents he had come to have signed. Fen Alderton, who had arranged Beatrice's hire. She read the statements twice. She looked up at Lord Merston, who was watching her read with the contained intensity of a man who has been waiting for a very long time for someone to reach the same conclusion he had reached, alone and been unable to act on. "You knew," she said. "I suspected," he said. "Suspicion is not evidence. Alderton managed this estate for years before Oliver died. He had access to everything. My brother found an irregularity in the Southernland records and told me he was going to speak with Alderton about it. 2 days later, Oliver was dead. He paused. I asked the constable to investigate. The constable spoke with Alderton and with your father, and the report came back as accidental death, and Alderton continued to manage the estate. And I could not." He stopped. He pressed his hand flat against the surface of the writing desk. "I could not prove it, and I could not leave. He had closed himself into this house," she realized. "Not from grief alone. From the particular imprisonment of a man who knows the truth and cannot speak it, who cannot leave, because leaving would mean abandoning the hope of eventually being believed, who cannot act without evidence, because the one person who could confirm what happened is the same person who has been managing his access to information for 2 years. She thought of herself, reading a solicitor's letter in her dead father's study. She thought, "We are not so different, you and I," she said, "the forged lease. Alderton is drawing unauthorized rent from a parcel of land that he may have always intended to claim. If Oliver found the original records, he would have seen the same discrepancy I found in the second week." Lord Merston said, "Yes, the room was quiet. Outside the West Library window, the November dark had settled fully, and the grounds of Merston Hall lay out in solid blackness. Beatrice thought, 'I came here because I thought you might have killed your brother.' She did not say this. She thought, 'I came here with a letter in my pocket and 6 years of inquest experience, and the certainty that the man who paid my father for silence was protecting himself.' She thought, 'I was not wrong exactly. I was only wrong about which man,' she said. 'I have something that belongs to this matter.' She reached into the pocket of her coat and removed the solicitor's letter. She set it on the table between them. She said, 'This came to my father's house after his death, addressed to him. It refers to the annual arrangement in the matter of Oliver Vane. It is signed by Mr. Alderton's clerk on Mr. Alderton's behalf.' Lord Merston looked at the letter. He did not touch it. His hands were very still on the edge of the desk. 'Your father,' he said. He took the payment. 'Yes.' He looked up at her. The expression on his face was not what she had expected. It was not the cool satisfaction of a man receiving confirmation of what he already believed. It was something more complicated, something that took into account the fact that she was standing in front of him, telling him a thing that cost her to say. "I'm sorry," he said. "That is a difficult thing to have found." Beatrice kept her spine straight. "Yes," she said, "but I found it and I brought it here, and I intend to do something useful with it, if you will allow me." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "What do you propose?" They planned across the library table with the solicitor's letter and the staff statements and the forged lease spread between them. And Beatrice learned that Rhys Vane, when he was not performing the dull, careful movements of a man managing grief, thought very quickly and with a lateral quality that complemented her own more systematic approach. He saw the political angles she didn't. She saw the documentary evidence he had not known how to read. By midnight they had the shape of it. Alderton had been drawing unauthorized rents from 3 separate parcels using forged leases, all bearing what was meant to look like Lord Merston's signature, all processed through a secondary account that would not surface in a standard estate audit. He had been doing it for 4 years, predating Oliver's death. Oliver Vane, who had a reckless honesty and a younger brother's habit of saying directly what he thought, had found one of the forged documents and had said so to Alderton's face, and had died before he could say it to anyone else. Henry Wyndham had been paid to ensure the inquest closed the matter, and the death stayed accidental. The estate solicitor who had arranged a grieving lord's isolation managed his affairs and then quietly recruited the dead coroner's daughter into his household, where she could be supervised. Only she had not been supervised. She had been too fast. Beatrice said, "The quarter session is in 3 weeks. There is a circuit judge coming to Aldwick from the North Circuit. He is not from here. He has no existing relationship with Alderton." Lord Merston said, "Alderton will be here on Tuesday to go over the quarterly accounts," she said. "Then we have 4 days." The day Alderton came, Merston Hall had been arranged with some care. The archive room was neatly ordered, Beatrice's ledgers closed and stacked. Mrs. Trove served tea in the sitting room at the appointed hour with her usual unmoved efficiency. Lord Merston sat in his usual chair and wore his usual expression of contained, distant courtesy, the one that said, "I am present, I am not engaged, I have been this way for 2 years, and you are accustomed to it." Alderton set his leather case on the table. He looked at Beatrice with the assessing eye of a man who had arranged her presence, and was confirming she was performing the expected function. She gave him a small, efficient nod. The records clerk. Right where he had put her. He began with the quarterly accounts. Lord Merston listened, asked the questions he had been asking for 2 years, and gave no sign of knowing anything different from what Alderton told him. Beatrice sat at the side table with her ledger and took notes. When Alderton reached the Southern Estate revenues, Beatrice said, without looking up from her ledger, "I notice the Strathlaw parcel is listed here under Merston rents. Could you direct me to the original grant for that parcel? I haven't been able to locate it in the archive." She kept her voice entirely neutral, the voice of a competent records clerk encountering an administrative gap. Alderton paused. He said, "That parcel's documentation may be held in the solicitor's office rather than the estate archive. An older arrangement." Beatrice made a small note. She said, "I see." "And the lease?" "I found a document that appeared to relate to it, but the signature—" "I'll look into it," Alderton said. His voice had not changed. He was good, she thought. 2 years of this, and he had not made a visible error in this room. Lord Merston said very quietly, "The signature is forged, Mr. Alderton." The room shifted. It was small. The shift, a change in weight, a change in what the air between them was made of. Alderton said, "I beg your pardon." Lord Merston said, "I have been reading my own signature for 31 years. Miss Wyndham has been reading it for 3 weeks across 40 years of estate documents. We are in agreement." He placed the forged lease on the table. He placed the staff statements beside it. He placed the letter to Henry Wyndham beside those. He said, "Mr. Alderton, I believe you have some things to account for." The composure lasted perhaps 30 seconds. Beatrice counted them without appearing to count them. Then Alderton reached for his case, with a speed that was a kind of answer all by itself, and found that the footman near the door was standing in a position that was not quite blocking the exit, but made the calculation clear. The constable from Aldwick arrived 11 minutes later. He had been waiting at the bottom of the drive. Alderton was escorted from Merston Hall at 3:15 in the afternoon. He had not spoken since the moment the constable produced a warrant signed by the Northern Circuit judge. He walked between the two officers with his leather case still under his arm, and his face was the face of a man reconsidering every decision at speed. And the front door of Merston Hall closed behind him with a sound that was unremarkable but felt, to Beatrice standing in the entrance hall, like a full stop. In the weeks that followed, the thing was done properly and publicly, with a deliberate thoroughness of people who had been prevented from doing it for 2 years and had no intention of allowing any ambiguity to remain. The forged leases were entered into evidence. The staff statements were formally authenticated. The accounting records from Alderton's secondary account were obtained through the county court and documented 3 fraudulent rent collections over 4 years, totalling a figure substantial enough that even the county magistrate, who had known Alderton socially for a decade, did not blink at the charges. Her father's name came into it as she had known it would. Henry Wyndham, late coroner of Aldwick Parish, paid to close a case he should have kept open. She gave her testimony on the matter in a plain room before the circuit judge, with her voice steady and her back straight, and her hands folded in her lap. And she said what was true, all of it, without softening the part that reflected poorly on a man she had loved, and was still, beneath all of this, in the process of grieving. Lord Merston attended every session of the proceeding. He sat in the second row and did not perform composure. He looked at what was happening directly, the way she had noticed he looked at things now, without the 2-year buffer of managed distance. After her testimony, he was waiting in the corridor outside, and he said, "That was well done," and she believed him because he said it the same way he said everything now, without the careful social cushioning he had used in their first conversation. She said, "It needed doing." He said, "Yes." He paused. He said, "I should like to speak with you about what comes next." What comes next, he said, was a question he had been unable to ask for 2 years, because the question of what came next had felt, for 2 years, like a betrayal of the fact that Oliver was not present to have a next. But the proceedings had reorganized something in the structure of that feeling, not resolved it, she understood, but shifted it from a wall to something more like weather, something he would carry without being wholly immobilized by. The East Wing archive needed permanent management. The estate had been mishandled for years and would require sustained attention to right. He was not, he said, in a position to offer her the situation she deserved. He was offering her the situation he could, and he was doing so formally because she had come into this house in the most exposed possible position, knowing what she knew and had done what she did anyway. She said, "That is a more detailed proposal than I expected." He said, "I have been rehearsing it for a week." She looked at him. She thought about the man she had first seen standing at a window with his back to her, and the man who now stood in the corridor and spoke plainly without practicing plainness. She thought about the forged lease and the face-down photograph and the coat draped over the chair in the West Library, still there because he had not moved it, and about the 2 of them working across a library table at midnight with the solicitor's letter between them. She said, "I'm not going to be managed, your lordship," he said. "I have noticed." The edge of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the possibility of one, and she thought, "There is the man who existed before all of this, not gone, not lost, simply waiting, the way a field waits under a long frost, for the conditions to be right," she said. "Then yes, I'll stay." 14 months later, Merston Hall was different in ways that were not immediately obvious to anyone who had not known it before. The East Archive was entirely reorganized. The 3 forged leases had been resolved in court, and the fraudulent rents repaid to the tenants who had been paying them. The West Library door was open more often than not, and the boots near the fire and the coat over the chair had been moved to a different place, a place that Rhys Vane had chosen, rather than simply left, which was a different thing. Mrs. Trove had been observed on one occasion to express approval of the way the archive ledgers were organised, which she did by saying nothing critical, which was as close to enthusiasm as she came. On a grey Tuesday in January, a letter arrived from the county court. Beatrice read it at her desk in the archive room, which now held 2 desks, one of which was hers, and one of which held Lord Merston's estate correspondence. because they had eventually found it more efficient to work in the same room. The letter confirmed the final settlement of the Alderton fraud proceedings. It noted that the testimony of Miss Beatrice Wyndham, formerly of Aldwick Parish, had been central to the prosecution's case. It closed, in the flat, careful language of official documents, all outstanding matters arising from the death of Oliver Vane. She read it twice. Then she went to the window. In the garden below, Rhys Vane was standing on the stone path with his face tilted up at the sky, which had gone pale and thin in the way it sometimes did in January, before it decided whether to snow. He looked unhurried. He looked like a man standing in his own garden, without calculating what the weather required of him, which was not something she had seen him do in their first months here. He looked up. He saw her at the window, which he did now, directly and without pretending he hadn't, and he raised one hand. She raised the letter. He walked inside. She set it on the desk and picked up her pen. There were 3 outstanding lease discrepancies in the Harrow boundary records, a clerical error in the 1891 survey, and a question about the Pell family cottage that needed resolving before the spring tenancy review. The door opened. He came to stand beside her desk and read the letter where it lay, and when he finished he was quiet for a moment, and then he put his hand over hers where it rested on the edge of the desk, and she turned her hand over and held his. Outside, the January sky had made up its mind. The first snow was coming down thin and straight across the garden, settling on the stone path where he had been standing a minute ago, filling in the impressions his boots had left. Beatrice looked at the blank ledger page in front of her, and then at the window, and then at the man standing beside her, and thought, "This is what it feels like when the ground holds." She turned the page and began,